Sharon Osbourne was born Sharon Rachel Arden in London in 1952. She grew up in a house where power mattered more than love. Her father, Don Arden, was a tough music manager who was feared by many in the industry. Their home was filled with business deals and harsh discipline, but very little warmth or kindness. When Sharon was only 6 years old, her mother died in a car accident. This tragedy left a deep hole in her young life, taking away the only source of gentleness she had known. Growing up without her mother and with a father who was always busy with work, Sharon learned early that she had to be strong to survive. She watched desperate musicians and ruthless business people come through her father's office, and she understood that fame always came with a price. She once said that in her childhood home, you had to learn to be tough before you learned how to laugh. As a teenager in the late 1960s, while other girls were making friends and falling in love, Sharon was learning about power and how to survive in a cruel world. By the late 1970s, when Sharon was 27, she was expected to take over her family's music business. But she had other plans. She met John Michael Ozzy Osbourne, who was 31 and had just been kicked out of the band Black Sabbath. Ozzy was broken by drug addiction and many people thought his career was over. But Sharon saw something in him that others missed. She saw not a fallen star, but someone who could rise again, just like herself. When Sharon decided to manage Ozzy and become his partner, her father was furious. This choice meant losing her family and the inheritance she was supposed to get. She was cut off from the family business and had to walk away from everything she had been raised to expect. But Sharon made her choice and never looked back. She knew that supporting Ozzy meant she was no longer her father's heir. She was now on her own, and betting everything on a man the world had written off. Managing Ozzy in those early years was incredibly difficult. They had no money, his reputation was ruined, and drugs were everywhere. Sharon had to mortgage her future on the belief that Ozzy could make a comeback. She spent nights in hotel rooms with unpaid bills piled up, praying that the man she loved would survive long enough to make it to the next show. There were mornings when Ozzy, ashamed and shaking, would tell her she saved his life when no one else would even look at him. In 1982, Sharon married Ozzy. This wasn't the beginning of a fairy tale. It was the start of a life where she would be his wife, manager, nurse, and protector all at once. Through the 1980s, Sharon helped rebuild Ozzy's career from nothing. She fought with record companies, dealt with criticism, and forced open doors that had been slammed shut. Albums like Blizzard of Oz and Diary of a Madman became huge successes, but each victory came at a great personal cost to Sharon. Behind all the success, Sharon was living between concert stages and emergency rooms. She had to deal with Ozzy's overdoses, which she tried to keep secret, while also raising their children. People saw the lights and excitement of the concerts, but Sharon only saw pill bottles, therapy appointments, and medical bills. Sometimes Ozzy would come off stage shaking and ask her not to let anyone see him like that. Sharon would hold him together while dealing with her own exhaustion. When Ozzfest launched in 1996, Sharon was praised as brilliant and tough, the woman who had created a metal music empire. But what people didn't see was that every contract she signed and every stage she built was paid for with sleepless nights and constant stress. She was called cold and power-hungry, but the truth was simpler and sadder. Sharon was a woman holding an entire kingdom, together through willpower and love alone. In the early 2000s, Sharon stepped into television when The Osbournes became a huge reality TV hit. The show made Sharon a household name, but it came with a price. Their private family life became public entertainment, and every argument and heartbreak was broadcast to the world. Sharon later admitted that reality television gave them fame, but took away their quiet family time. The show made them both famous and fragile. Sharon's television success continued with shows like The X Factor and The Talk, where she became known for being funny, honest, and sometimes harsh. But television can be cruel, and in 2021, Sharon faced a major scandal that ended her career on The Talk. The backlash was swift and brutal, with social media turning against her. Sharon, who had stood up to executives and drug dealers, now faced millions of strangers demanding her downfall. She later admitted this period nearly broke her completely. Throughout her television career, Sharon was fighting another battle, this time against her own body. In 2002, at age 50, she was diagnosed with colon cancer. Chemotherapy made her incredibly weak and sick, causing her hair to fall out and leaving her barely able to walk. But amazingly, Sharon still appeared on television, painting on her smile and cracking jokes while secretly suffering. Fans laughed with her, never knowing that moments before filming, she had been crying in pain. The cancer diagnosis brought back memories of losing her mother young, and Sharon was terrified of leaving her own children motherless. She would lie awake at night whispering, "I can't leave them motherless, not like I was." This fear gave her strength to keep fighting even when her body wanted to give up. As if cancer wasn't enough, in December 2003, Ozzy had a terrible ATV accident that left him with broken bones and crushed ribs. Sharon, still weak from chemotherapy, dragged herself through hospital corridors to stay by his side. Her own health was fragile, but she refused to let go of his hand. At the same time, their children Jack and Kelly were struggling with drug and alcohol addiction, and Sharon had to fight for their recovery while battling her own illness. In 2012, Sharon made the difficult decision to have preventive surgery to remove both breasts because of her family history of cancer. She didn't do it for appearance. She did it to stay alive and not leave her children without a mother. The operation was brutal, and the recovery was hard, but Sharon was open about her choice, helping other women who faced similar decisions. But perhaps the deepest wound came in 2016 when Sharon discovered that Ozzy had been unfaithful to her. After more than 30 years of marriage, this betrayal felt like a knife in her chest. For the first time, she walked away from him, though only briefly. Sharon later said that choosing to stay and work through the problems was not weakness. It was the hardest decision she ever made. They went to therapy together and slowly rebuilt their trust. Then came another terrifying incident when Ozzy, consumed by illness and addiction, became violent toward Sharon. She later recalled the terror of that night when she truly believed she might not survive. Police arrived just in time to save her. That night broke her, but it also forced her to decide if love was stronger than fear. She chose to stay and help Ozzy get the treatment he needed, but she never forgot how close she came to losing everything. Ozzy's health began to seriously decline in 2019 after a fall at home led to multiple surgeries. Metal rods were put in his body where music once flowed, and the man who once leaped across stages could barely cross a room without help. For Ozzy, this was not just physical pain, but humiliation. He said these past 4 years had been nothing but hell, and if he could do it over, he would never have had the surgeries. Sharon watched this decline in heartbreaking detail. She learned the language of painkillers and physical therapy, sitting through endless hours in waiting rooms where hope felt thin. At night, when Ozzy was in terrible pain, she would wrap her arms around him, knowing she couldn't stop his suffering, but refusing to let him face it alone. In January 2020, Ozzy publicly announced he had Parkinson's disease. His hands shook and his voice cracked, but Sharon sat beside him with fierce eyes and her hand over his. She refused to let the world see only weakness. She became his voice when his faltered, and his shield when the world turned cruel. The pandemic years brought another challenge when both Sharon and Ozzy caught COVID-19. Their already weakened bodies were forced into yet another fight for survival. Sharon lay awake listening to Ozzy's labored breathing, terrified that their children could lose both parents. She wasn't afraid of dying herself. She was afraid of leaving him alone in the dark. Understanding that time was running out, Sharon organized what would be Ozzy's final concert in Birmingham on July 5, 2025. She knew this was not just a concert but a farewell, and she carried the weight of knowing that his failing body might give out under the lights. But Ozzy had begged not to fade quietly. He wanted to roar one last time. When he stepped on stage that night, frail but still defiant, his cracked voice rose above the crowd. It wasn't just music. It was defiance of time itself. The end came in the early hours of July 22, 2025. Sharon never left Ozzy's side as his breathing grew shallow and his chest rose and fell like fragile glass. She leaned close and whispered, "You roared until the end, my love. Rest now." His eyes opened once more to meet hers, and then with a final breath, he was gone. Sharon would later describe that silence as unbearable. After more too, and 40 years of fighting every battle at his side, she felt half her soul leave with him. Since Ozzy's death, Sharon has carried herself with dignity in public, but those close to her know the wound is still raw. She has grown thinner, and her eyes are often distant, lost in memories. The nights are the hardest, with the empty space in their bed serving as a constant reminder of her loss. Most days, she stays at their countryside home in Buckinghamshire, where Jack, Kelly, and Amy visit often with her grandchildren. Sharon still works occasionally, recording the Osbourne family podcast when she has the strength and quietly managing projects related to Ozzy's legacy. But everything moves slower now, at her own pace, and in a rhythm that makes room for grief. She has spoken openly about struggling to sleep since Ozzy's death, and sometimes walks the garden at dawn because the nights feel endless. Even in mourning, Sharon has transformed her pain into purpose. The Osbourne estate, worth over $200 million, will secure her family's future, while also giving back to causes they cared about. Money goes toward Parkinson's research, children's charities, and music education programs. Even the proceeds from Ozzy's final concert were quietly redirected to these same causes, turning farewell applause into research grants and hospital support. Sharon's life story teaches us that resilience isn't about never breaking. It's about rising even when broken. She shows us that forgiveness isn't weakness, but the courage to keep a family alive, and that legacy isn't measured in monuments, but in the lives we touch along the way. If Ozzy's roar taught us how to defy the darkness, Sharon's endurance teaches us how to carry the light when storms refuse to pass. Her scars became her crown, proof that sometimes the greatest act of defiance is not perfection, but survival itself.